Transformers Devastation is the latest game from one of the industry's greatest yet most underappreciated developers, Platinum Games, and once again Platinum has successfully created one of the most genuinely fun, engaging, and engrossing games of the year. With fast-paced action, layered mechanics, fun characters, and an excellent soundtrack, Transformers Devastation will reinvigorate your love for the iconic robots in disguise. After a swarm of Insecticons begin ravaging a city on Earth, the Autobots arrive on the scene in order to investigate why these creatures are attacking and what dubious plans the Decepticons have in store for them. The story in Transformers Devastation is endearing in its simplicity and feels very much akin to an episode of the original Transformers TV series, even going so far as to recast many of the original voice actors who lend another layer of authenticity to an already stellar experience. The narrative is keenly aware of its strengths and doesn't try to be anything more than it should be, an engaging Transformers story where the bad guys need to be stopped by our heroes in disguise in order to save the planet. In spite of the overall brevity of the experience, each of the Autobots will leave a lasting impression on you and deliver some genuinely funny lines throughout the entirety of the game. In an industry that continues attempting to push the envelope in terms of supposed adult themes, it's a breath of fresh air to encounter a title that is a simple story about the clashing of good and evil, and while you may very well be able to delve into the motivations behind the actions of Optimus Prime and Megatron respectively, when it comes down to it, there's little ambiguity in regards to who the good guys are. It is apparent that the developers have taken great care to recapture the feel of the original Transformers series, and nowhere is that more perfectly exemplified than through the game's striking art style. The cell shading does an excellent job at recreating the original look and feel of the Transformers cartoons, and while not the most technically impressive game out there, it is definitely one of the more visually pleasing and can sometimes be absolutely beautiful to look at. The character models themselves have been tailored with a level of heart and soul that is sorely lacking in many AAA game releases of the day, whether it's Optimus Prime standing in his signature heroic pose, Bumblebee ricocheting himself off of enemies, or Devastator trying to smash you into scrap metal. All of the characters look, feel, and animate as they should, and are a joy to see and hear in action. While Devastation features many of the most heroic and memorable characters in the Transformers series, only 5 of these characters are actually playable: Optimus Prime, Bumblebee, Sideswipe, Wheeljack, and Grimlock. This may initially seem to be too small of a number, but when taking into account all the various character-specific attributes and abilities that they come equipped with, then factoring in the myriads of weapons that can be purchased, synthesized, and leveled, you'll come to understand that there is plenty of gameplay variety to be discovered. The gameplay at its core feels almost like a pastiche of Platinum's greatest, taking obvious inspiration from other Platinum games like Bayonetta, Metal Gear Rising, and even Vanquish to a certain extent. All of these disparate elements work in conjunction to create a deeply engrossing and immersive system of play that is hectic and original, while still feeling familiar and safe. While this amalgamation of various elements can be viewed as lazy and lackadaisical, it's the way in which all of these elements work together that truly allows Transformers Devastation to shine on its own as a unique and subversive take on Platinum's tried and true gameplay. Devastation isn't merely a stylish action game, it's a homogenization of action, shooter, and RPG that is about as addictive as it is challenging. Each of the Autobots are equipped with unique and interesting attributes, however at its core the game differentiates itself through the transforming mechanic that allows characters to seamlessly switch between humanoid and vehicle forms on the fly. Transforming is an integral component of the combat system, as linking combos into transformations is the best way to inflict massive damage against adversaries. After chaining a number of attacks together, Autobots will go into a pseudo slow-mo and glow gold for a few seconds. It is at this point that players are allowed to do a variety of things, the most advantageous of which being to transform. Transforming while in this state allows the Autobots to instantly rev themselves up and clash with whatever enemy is in their way in a satisfying explosion of power and domination. The amount of control that players are given during combat may ostensibly seem somewhat shallow and repetitive, however if players are particularly sagacious they will begin experimenting with the various nuances of the mechanics. Enemy attacks can be parried and of course dodged. Perfect dodges will activate focus mode, which is very much akin to witch time in Bayonetta, which causes time to slow down around the Transformers, giving players access to a variety of options to wreak havoc on their enemies. While melee weapons are the primary and perhaps the most practical means of offense, the Autobots can also equip themselves with various projectile weapons. Initially, these weapons may seem underpowered and unnecessary. However, as the game progresses, they quickly become an integral tool for players to experiment with, and can actually be used in conjunction with transformations to cause some truly inspiring, satisfying, and impressive combos. In many hack and slash titles, projectile weapons tend to be little more than secondary items that are only useful in linking combos or juggling enemies. In Transformers Devastation, projectile weapons come with a range of attack styles and unique abilities such as delayed explosions, freezing, and even stunning, which leaves Decepticons open to almost infinite combo potential. Players who become particularly adept at this system will find themselves switching between melee, projectile, and vehicle form assiduously, allowing for multiple unique and interesting styles that cohesively link all of these elements into a gratifying and nuanced whole. What's most impressive about the combat in Devastation is how easily accessible it is, whilst containing layers and layers of depth that may go unnoticed by many. Being able to transform and quickly roam combat arenas in the midst of mass melees makes the gameplay feel fast, frenetic, and exciting. Each of the Autobots comes equipped with unique abilities and attributes. Experimenting with the multiple combat styles adds even more depth and variety to an already deceptively intricate game, as each of their transformations, ultimate techniques, and vehicle attacks are unique and interesting. The characters tend to share basic combos and overall feel. However, a character like Optimus Prime is going to be much slower than a character like Bumblebee. Nonetheless, Optimus will be able to take far more damage and consequently do much more damage than Bumblebee with fewer attacks. The character specific abilities can work in completely changing the way in which combat scenarios are approached. For example, Bumblebee has an ability which allows him to reset enemy animations in the midst of combos, so if an enemy decides to attempt an attack on Bumblebee while he's in the middle of punishing them, he can use his special ability to circumvent their attack, which will leave them dazed and susceptible to even more damage. Becoming accustomed to each of the character's strengths and weaknesses adds to the gameplay variety, and indeed, depending on which character players have decided to tackle the story with, the cutscenes will change to accommodate the Autobot that's been chosen. While the core mechanics of Devastation are complex and engrossing, the overall game design leaves something to be desired, as there are very few environments, challenges are recycled throughout the game, and boss battles are repeated constantly. What exacerbates this issue is the fact that Devastation is already a brief enough experience as it is, lasting around 4 to 6 hours depending on which difficulty is selected. Quizzically, in spite of an already short campaign length, the game manages to recycle various elements of its design, which definitely detracts from the experience overall. It seems as though the developers were keenly aware of this particular flaw, and in response decided to satiate the game with secrets, challenges, and items for players to discover. The game takes place in an open environment that can be explored for hidden chests, weapons, items, and even combat and driving challenges. The higher difficulties also change enemy encounters and even go so far as to make Decepticons far more aggressive, swift, and dangerous. There's plenty in the way of content to keep players busy to make up for the campaign's brevity. In addition to the various secrets, characters to play as, and leveling of weapons and items, Devastation also features a challenge mode with various combat scenarios to overcome. These challenges feature some of the most difficult and heart-pounding situations found in the entire game, even going so far as to allow players to face the Autobots themselves in a massive gauntlet. The challenges and higher difficulties in Devastation are unforgiving and will put your combat mastery to the test. However, unlike other games within the genre, the difficulty jump doesn't only occur because of an increase of more dangerous enemies and attack speeds, but also due to the fact that enemies are on much higher levels than they were on previous difficulties. If you didn't bother exploring the environments for secrets and items, it may be very easy to find your Autobots are under-leveled, which may lead to frustration in many players who feel that they have the technical expertise to overcome the challenges that the game has presented, but don't have the items or abilities needed to do sufficient damage on adversaries. While this issue can be ameliorated by replaying levels or completing challenge mode on various difficulties, it doesn't change the fact that some players will feel like they have to grind in order to achieve victory, which isn't very satisfying in a genre that is more so about mechanical mastery than character stats. What's also of particular note is that players can almost overlevel themselves to the point where higher difficulties are much less intimidating than they initially seem, thus allowing less skilled players to enjoy everything that the game has to offer, even if they don't have a firm enough grasp on the mechanics to overcome challenges through sheer skill. The number of options that Devastation gives the players in regards to how to customize their Autobots is staggering, as each of the heroes can be equipped with 4 weapons at a time. Adding on to this are new attacks which can be purchased from the shop, and even brand new abilities and attributes that can augment your Autobots through research and development. Players can also purchase new weapons and even increase weapon effectiveness by synthesizing them, which will not only increase their levels and attack power, but can also add brand new attributes to Autobots that make them even more powerful. This interesting amalgamation of stylish action and RPG is definitely an addictive one that I'd love to see expanded upon further in future Transformers games, or Platinum games in general. There's plenty here for players to experiment with, and if you're particularly fond of this kind of gameplay, you can easily sink around 60 hours into Devastation just by leveling up, completing challenges, and creating more powerful weapons. The game truly does focus on its strengths to the point where its blemishes simply become background noise. However, there is one particular issue that cannot be overlooked, which is the game's horrendous camera. Devastation doesn't feature any sort of lock-on system for melee combat, which is confounding considering how fast-paced and frenetic the gameplay is. Enemies exacerbate this issue immensely as they won't hesitate to attack from off-screen, and while sound prompts and visual cues can be helpful during many of the more infuriating sequences, it can be very easy to become disoriented during certain enemy encounters and boss battles due to the sheer breadth of what's happening on screen at times. A lock-on function would have definitely worked in ameliorating this issue substantially, especially during certain boss battles. The boss battle with Starscream when going to Cybertron shows the absolute worst that Devastation has to offer in terms of game design, as without lock-on, this quickly becomes one of the most frustrating and disorienting boss fights that you could possibly experience, since the background constantly tilts on its axis and Starscream won't hesitate to fly off camera, and makes for a perfect recipe for frustration. Camera issues aside, Transformers Devastation is a game that is purely fun to play from start to finish. It doesn't take itself too seriously, and gives you about as much as you are willing to put into it. If you decide to play through the game once and never touch it again, I believe that you'd be doing the title, as well as yourself, a disservice, as you wouldn't be experiencing the entirety of what Devastation has to offer. The challenge mode alone can add hours upon hours of replay value as you hone your skills against waves and waves of Decepticons while leveling up, getting double S ranks, customizing, and discovering new and unique combat styles. Even though Devastation doesn't particularly reinvent the genre and relies heavily on titles that are far more nuanced and mechanically sound, it adds just enough of a unique spin to Platinum's exemplary combat mechanics to make for an experience that is challenging, addictive, and most of all, fun. If you aren't already a fan of the stylish action genre, then this game likely won't change your mind. However, if you love Transformers, overcoming challenges, giant robots, amazing music, endearing characters, or unraveling game mechanics, this is definitely the game for you. Ostensibly, it may seem as though Devastation is merely a shallow and flawed beat-em-up made to cash in on the Transformers license. However, nothing could be further from the truth. If you are willing to give the game a chance and truly allow yourself to experience all that it has to offer, I'm certain that you'll find that Transformers Devastation is brimming with a lot more heart, soul, and depth than meets the eye.